Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. We're getting set up and we are just about ready to get started. So for those of you who can hear me, I'm not sure if you can or not. So here's how this works. With Hopin, we'll do the first bit here of presentations for about 30 to 45 minutes. And we'll use this stage area where Tom and Rob are joining me now for video presentations. Ryan Chenkie is going to be joining us. Let's say hi to Ryan right now. And for that part, we'll be using the chat channel. Do use the event tab. I see some of you are in the session tab, but let's try to stick to the event tab. Ryan, welcome.
Hey,
Chat, and then we'll have some open discussion and Q&A, and that's where anyone can join the stage area. I think we have up to 9 people at a time, which will be fun. So there's some confusion around using the audio video. If you want to join, you don't need to do that now, is the main point. So Ryan, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Good to be here.
Ryan, where are you joining us from?
I'm in Ottawa, up in Canada. And yeah, that's where I live and work remotely for Prisma. They're based in Germany, but I'm here in Canada.
Okay, yeah, very good. Thank you. Welcome. We're going to do about 5-10 minutes of just State of the Union with Redwood, and then we'll turn things over to you. And I did tease out a little bit. We're talking Prisma relations today.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Oh man,
bet.
It's everybody's favorite topic.
Awesome. Sounds good to me.
Oh, Peter's over. Yeah, Peter, come on in. Well, wherever he is, let you guys go. So introducing. Oh, there he is. So introducing a few people. I'll kick things off here, but my name's David, Tom, Rob, Peter are joining me. They're from the RedwoodJS core team. Ryan is from Prisma, and he'll be doing the main presentation today. And welcome to everyone. We're going to try to use the event tab in the chat for this part of the conversation. So if you hopefully are in the session, you'll see that there's 2 tabs under the chat. I'll call them in the right sidebar. Choose the event if you see that. I think some of you are in the session, so we'll try that. So where we want to start, well, first off, welcome. Thank you for joining the RedwoodJS Meetup. We are going to be recording everything today. So we'll be keeping some notes and be posting those on the website with the live recording afterward, as well as our forum. And where we want to start today is a little bit of the state of the RedwoodJS verse and just things that have been going on. It's been a really fun last 2 to 4 weeks. And a couple things we wanted to make sure you know about. And I wanted to start. Let me try the screen share here. This will be really quick. That's going to duplicate for just a second. We wanted to let everyone know, is my screen sharing yet? Yeah, there we go. Another tip for you all, if you double click on the screen share, that's going to maximize the screen. Kind of testing this out to make sure this works. So if anyone cannot see my screen, please let me know in the chat channel right now, and we'll work on that. So, did they just, yeah, there it is. Sorry, talking to myself. So a couple things we want to let you know. If you ever want to find out what version Redwood is at, and it's been changing a lot frequently, you can find that a couple different ways. So I want to start with redwoodjs.com, the homepage, and let everyone know that we are on version 18. And when new versions releases come out, there's a couple different ways you can find out about that. You can follow us on Twitter. That's a great way to find out. You can join Twitter. I wanted to show our forums down here. So there's a couple tabs you can get to from here. So that's a forum and chat. Do sign up for our newsletter. We hopefully have another one coming out next week. And those same links are right up here. So we've got Twitter, the forum. Those pop-ups are coming in Discord. And another primary way to find out what's happening with the RedwoodJS releases is to go to GitHub. And this is the main framework repository. This is redwoodjs.com Redwood. Let me boost up the size here a little bit. And here's where all the important action happens. Down here in the releases corner, let me boost up the size a little bit. You can see what the latest release is. I'm going to click on all the releases, and we spend a lot of time making sure that in each of these releases, you get all the release notes for what's happening, if there's been any break-in changes. You can view the highlights. So for example, Supabase. I sound like I want to be a 90s pop band, but Supabase Authentication Provider was released, doing a lot on TypeScript and other convention support. Peter might mention those in a second. And how to upgrade. Sometimes there are manual code modifications that need to be done. And we have a few things that will help you upgrade really quickly. And this is the last thing I want to show everyone when we get started, is sometimes you don't know what version of Redwood you're working on. If you install a new project, it will always start right at the beginning. But if you don't know if you're on the current latest release, there's a couple things you can do. So first off, Yarn, we use the command line tools for Redwood quite often. That RW, let me make this a little bit bigger here. That RW is a short for Redwood. Yarn Redwood info. Sorry, let me get back up there. It's going to give you system information both about your operating system, node, Yarn versions, and then it's also going to give you information about what Redwood packages you're running. And my computer just slows to a halt here whenever I'm doing this live screen share. So there we are. And we can see that if you look right down here at the very bottom, NPM packages, RedwoodJS core is at 17.2, and it's telling me that I could upgrade to 0.18.0. So we have one more command, and we will run through the whole thing. That's yarn redwood upgrade. And yarn redwood upgrade would take you through an interactive step-by-step to upgrade all the packages for Redwood at once. If you look at the help for this, you can also find a way to upgrade to the latest Canary. That's a bit of an advanced usage help. And this will walk you through a very quick upgrade process to get up to the latest. But don't ever skip the release notes, because sometimes things break and upgrades take a little bit of manual changes, which we document in release notes. So it's been an exciting month. We've had over 20 people contribute to the Redwood projects to date. And all those contributions are moving the project along really quickly. So that's been really fun. Okay, that's all I wanted to show. Let me stop the screen share. And Peter, Rob, Tom, wanted to just, what's happening in the Redwood verse, in your neck of the verse? So what exciting things are going on, and what activity is hopping right now?
I can say a few words about the state of the Redwood and jump into that. I was looking at some of the numbers around Redwood, and it's been going awesome. So we launched the 01 release, I think, in, what was it, March or April. So we're coming on around 6 months, and I was looking at the various numbers. So we just passed 3,000 Twitter followers, which is pretty amazing. 4,500 stars on GitHub. We were looking at the number of NPM downloads. And for Create Redwood app, it was downloaded more than 9,000 times. So there's a lot of people out there that I think are trying out Redwood, going through the tutorial. And that's pretty amazing to see. You also, very interesting to note, there's been more than 1,700 requests for stickers. So we've sent out, and we used to send 5 to everyone. We now send 3 because sending 5 turned out to be a lot. And I would guess that many of those would go unused, but 3 seems more reasonable. So now we do 3. So we've sent out thousands and thousands of stickers to people, and we'll continue doing so for the foreseeable future because it's fun and really not that expensive to do. So 1,700 sticker requests. And what's great is the sticker requests often come with really nice comments. So people say things like, oh, I had this up a second ago. People say things like, congratulations and thank you for your open source contributions. I believe RedwoodJS can become the Rails of the front-end frameworks. Thank you for the generosity in bringing out a great framework. I knew about it yesterday. Currently, I'm going through the tutorials. Thank you. It's really fun to see the comments that people put in here. They're really, there's hundreds of them, and they really are super motivational for us. So if you don't have a sticker yet, please go to that URL that David posted in there, request your stickers, and we'll get you those sent out. You put them on your laptop or wherever you like. And it's really fun. We have a half dozen or more production apps that people are doing. So many of the people are probably here that have production apps. We're building some of our own internally. Rob has one that I think he's going to talk about. And it's just really exciting to see all of the momentum and to have you all involved. So I want to say welcome to the community. If this is your first time, we welcome you. We're going to have an open chat at the end of this session, and we'd love for you to pop in and say hi. And if you're curious about where we're at and where we're going, there's a fairly new roadmap section of the website that you can go to, and you can read about the things that we intend to be doing over the next couple of months. We're trying to get a 1.0 release out before the end of the year. We have really good momentum now. Peter's been blasting through tickets. We have a bunch of contributors that are doing amazing work, and I think we can do it. I think we can hit it before the end of the year. So that's what's on my mind. And thank you all for being here.
That's awesome. I'm going to give a small TypeScript update. Last time when I spoke about TypeScript, I gave the very cryptic timeline of it will be ready soon, but not as soon as you think. And in order to qualify that a little bit, I'm South African, and two of the things that we as South Africans say to each other are, I will be there now, or I will be there just now. And those two things contextually mean very specific things to South Africans. So my concept of time is blurry. I might use things such as now, just now, or soon but not as soon as you think. I apologize. So to give you a little update about TypeScript, we have added TypeScript support for all the magical things in Redwood. Things like auto imported pages, routes, and the last one is directory named imports. We're very close to the point where we can actually start converting Create Redwood app into TypeScript, and that's probably what will happen next. And after that, we have to convert the generators. And then we will have TypeScript support. That work has been happening fairly frequently, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to happen soon. Yeah, that's my update with regards to TypeScript. What I also want to tell you about is that we have 2 more deployment targets. We originally shipped with Netlify, and then we added Vercel. We added 2 commands to support that: yarn redwood generate deploy Vercel or Netlify. And then we added a 3rd one, which was AWS serverless using the serverless framework. So we now support 3 targets out of the box, and we'd love to just continue supporting more. So if you have an affinity for any one of those platforms, we'd love for you to help us make that happen. And that's my update.
So Peter, would you say TypeScript is coming soon, or is it soon?
Just now. Now.
Now.
Yeah.
What is the difference between now and just now?
So just now means that I will be there really, like I'm leaving. Now means I'm not going to leave in a while. It's not... Yeah, and then you probably know where I live, so you're like, all right, it's like 5 minutes away, or sometime later today. So,
all right. Okay, so I've been working on Repeater for people who don't know. If you need to do, and of course the tip is you can double click that window to make it bigger. If you need to do background jobs, really anyone needs to do background jobs, but we kind of target it for Jamstack folks. So if you need to send an email in an hour or tomorrow or 2 weeks from now, or you need to do something recurringly, so like every minute, every hour, every day, whatever, sign up for Repeater. So I have like a nice little homepage now, and I mostly been working on the library this past week. So there's repeater dev-js, and there's tons of usage examples here, but you basically initialize it with your application token, and then you can enqueue jobs. You can check on the status of existing jobs. You can get yourself a job. You can see the results of that job. So like every time it's run, see what's going on. And behind the scenes, this is just using the GraphQL API. It just saves you from having to write all the GraphQL. Yeah, that's what I've been working on. That's it.
That's good stuff. and all happened. And this is like all within the last weeks. So that's been really fun. Well, Ryan, welcome. We're gonna hand things over to you, and we'll duck out of here so people can see your screen share.
Cool.
But we've met Ryan. This is actually our first seeing you. We normally
Yes.
get to spend time on the chats together, but it's been a real pleasure to get to work with Prisma both as a tool for Redwood, but also the whole team. It just, everyone there has really been great to interact with. So how long have you been with Prisma?
I'm into month number 3 now, right? I started in July. So yeah, into month number 3. So still fairly new. I'm pretty fresh around there, but it's awesome. I really love working there. Everyone that I work with is amazing. I knew some of them from previous to working at Prisma, but it's awesome. It's great working there, and I'm loving the product. I've loved it for a while, so it's awesome to be able to evangelize a product that I quite like myself. And Redwood, I am brand new to, so I am new to Prisma, and I am just new to Redwood.
Well played, sir.
And thank you. And both are awesome. I'm really enjoying Redwood. So I think if unless you had anything else to say, maybe I can just take it away to talk about what we'll do.
Yeah, well, it sounds great. And we're on standby. If you're looking for any witty banter, time killers while you're debugging things, that's what we're here for. But also, if you want to explore anything with Redwood, shout out. We'll jump up. Otherwise, we'll just hand it off to you, and we'll kind of open up for discussion when you're done. But Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and we'll let you have at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. And so because I am new to Redwood, I may need some of that witty banter as I muddle through here. But I was thinking what we could do today is talk about relations. So David tells me this is a big topic of interest to Redwood developers, relations in Prisma, and how you might think about them, how you might conceptualize relating one table to another. I think the place that you get to after you do the tutorial, the Redwood tutorial, is a state where you've got a pretty simple model or a couple models. I think you've got your post model, and you've got there's another one in there too for your contact form, right? So this is the state that you get to by the end of the tutorial. But from what I am hearing, it's really of interest how you would relate two tables together. So I think what we'll do today is I'll show you how we can conceptualize two different types of relations. There are kind of 3 different relations that you might think about, I guess, with any database, really, any relational database. Maybe there are more than that. I know of 3 that are pretty typical. You've got your one-to-one relations, you've got your one-to-many relations, and then you've got your many-to-many relations. And if you're familiar with database design and you've worked with databases before, that's probably fairly familiar to you. If you want to follow along with these docs, this is at the Prisma docs. So prisma.io/docs, and we're at the relations section under Prisma schema. That's where we're at here. So I think what we'll start with is we'll start by talking about a one-to-many relation. And I've got this project here somewhere. Here we go, where I'm running the Redwood app. And I'm over here in my browser. Here is the application. We're getting this 400 right now because I've got to do some things. I've got to make some things happen to get this all to be happy and to wire up. So let's go over here. I will go into the API directory into Prisma, and I've got a Postgres database going right here, but I haven't migrated anything yet. So I'm starting from like a clean slate, basically, with Prisma. If I go into my Prisma schema, what we've got here is, again, the state that you get to by the end of the tutorial. You've got your post model, and you've got your contact model. And so maybe what we could do to demonstrate a one-to-many relationship is, let's say that a post would have comments. That's a pretty reasonable thing in any kind of blog system, I think. So we could do model comment, and that's going to have an ID. We can use an integer for this ID. We say that it's the primary key. We say that it should have a default value of auto increment. And just a tip here, if you're not super familiar with Prisma, sometimes the way that I demo these things is, you might not want to use an integer, an auto incrementing integer for your ID. If you have a table, for instance, where IDs are made public, maybe in the URL, and you want to not have them be enumerable, what you might want to do in that case is have your ID be a string, and then you'd mark it as ID, and you would say your default is going to be something like a UUID, universally unique ID. But in any case, integer is fine for us today. So we will default it again to say it will auto increment. So comments should have a body, it'll be a string, and then we can do something like created at. We won't really use that today, but we'll just mimic what we've got up top where we've got created at, which defaults to now. And we can save that. So we've got this comment table essentially now is what this will turn into. And what we can do is we can start to relate this to our post immediately before we even migrate here. So a post, let's think about this. We've got a post table and we've got a comment table. We want to make these two things tie together. And how we would do that is we would say that post will have comments. We'll do singular comment, and that will be a list of comments. And so what I've got here basically is we're in a state now where we've got, and you know what, I'm gonna make this, I'm looking over at my prepared code, I'm gonna make this pluralize. That's what I did before. We got a state now where we've got this comments key, and it's pointing to something that isn't a scalar type. It's pointing to something that is a model type within our Prisma schema, which is found down here. So, some of these are scalar types like integer or string, but comment is a bit different. And what this is signifying here in Prisma is that this is going to be a relationship. And when we point to a relationship like this, there's another piece of work we have to do on our comment model to tie it together. And that's to use the relation decorator, the relation, you do at relation to get basically your instructions for how these things relate together. But instead of writing that out, if I've got the Prisma DevTools installed, I can just hit save. And what you'll notice is that it is going to insert some stuff down here on comment for me. So we've got the relation decorator. It's got a couple things, fields, and that points to something called post ID, and references points to ID. So what are these things about? Well, if we take a look at this field right here, post is actually something that is in the Prisma world, but not in your database. And what that means is that when I go to run this migration, we're not actually going to get a column show up called post. Instead, this is just simply something that the Prisma client is going to use to kind of reason about how these things are tied together. I like to do this. It auto names it to capitalize post. I like to be consistent and call it post. And I'm going to say this is going to be required. A comment has to have a post. But down here with post ID, this is a scalar type, and this is going to show up in your database. You'll have a column called post ID, and it's this post ID column that's going to reference up to post here. So if we kind of read through this relation decorator, fields, we're saying that the relation kind of points to this foreign key called post ID, which references this, this key ID on our post model. So, it's a little bit to wrap your head around there. The Prisma docs will kind of take you further to get your head around that. But why don't we save it? We'll go over here into our terminal and let's do yarn redwood db save, and we'll just do init maybe. Go through, get my migration all started up. Hopefully everything is connected properly. Looks like I got a good migration there. And then we will go through and do yarn redwood db up is the command. I'm always trying to map together these redwood commands with what I know from Prisma, because they're a bit different if you're doing straight up Prisma. But in any case, it looks like we're done. Let's go over to the database now. We can refresh here, and cool. So we've got some stuff that comes from the previous work that we did from the tutorial, like contact and post. And now we've got comment as well. So we've got that table in there. And I know this is probably hard to see. I don't think I can zoom in, unfortunately, when I'm here in Table Plus. But just if you can't see that, believe me, I've got post ID up here as the fourth column. So that is how we get our model wired together. There's another step though if we want to start using this in our application, and that is to work with our GraphQL schemas and our also the resolvers. So the stuff that's found here, if we're in API, we go to source, we go into GraphQL. We're going to need something for comment. We're going to need a comment SDL, and we're also going to need to adjust what's here in services. So let's do this. We'll do yarn redwood generate SDL for comment. All right, let's see what we get. Generating SDL files. Cool. We've got comments. It gets pluralized for us. The typical stuff we would get for GraphQL. That's awesome. We got a comments.js file here. And we've got we've got two things here for queries. We got one to find many, and then one to find if you're kind of querying, because these things are related together. If you're querying for a post, you can get the comments associated. So there's a caveat here with the way that relations and the generated code from Redwood ties together. And that's got to do with like how basically how the generator kind of works. So here, there's a doc on this, Prisma Relations and Redwood Scaffold Generator. You'll get some code that isn't going to work out of the box. There's going to need to be manual intervention for you to make everything work out when you're doing relations. But it's not all that tricky. So I invite you to read this doc. This will kind of explain the issue, and it'll also give you some code that you can throw in if you want to make this more automatic. Like there's a manual workaround. But we can take a look at kind of like the easier way that you would do this if we see how we would kind of tie these things together. So let's see, post SDL. A post is going to have comments. So if I come here and I say comments, and I say that this is a list of comments, then I will be able to query or write comments associated with my posts. Now, if I'm down here in post, I've got everything that I would typically use for getting my posts. And if I want to get the comments associated with them, maybe I'd want to find many posts, and I would want to include comments and say that will be true. This is the Prisma way of saying, give me my comments back when my posts are found. And I might say the same thing if I am down here and I am finding one. I can say include comments true. Okay, so why don't we get to the point where we can create a comment and associate it with a post? This is probably the spot where it gets a little bit trickier, but we'll muddle through here. For context, I have a screen over here. If I go to, so I'm still getting a network error, and I want to just resolve this before we go too much further so that you can see something happening on the screen. Comments and type post, and that's because I need to come over here to my post SDL. Post has comments. I didn't have that saved, I believe, was the issue. Okay, so we've got empty on post. That's because I need to create a post. I've got a fresh database that I started with. So let's create a post. My first post body is there. Let's save that. Cool, we got one. Now, if we go back over to the home screen, my first post is here. And I've got a bunch of stuff that's gone wrong because I haven't completed the code yet. But if we go home, I've got this comment section, and I'm including like an input box once we get into here that will show us, that will give us a place to actually create a comment. So let's kind of get ourselves some code that is going to do that. And in fact, what I might do is go into here and just read so if I go back and I am over into blog post cell, I'm doing this. What I might do, actually, I'm looking for a post. Let's go for comments. Let's just query for them right away. ID and body. That's going to be, I need, let's look for the other spots too. Blog post page. So blog post cell. Where do I have my other components? Blog post. And wanted to see a blog post cell. That's the other thing too. Okay, I've got comments in there. So let's see where we're at now. There we go. So now we're into our post page, and we've got this box to leave a comment. So if I try to leave a comment, I have nothing good going on. If I go to my GraphQL errors, what I've got here is cannot query create comment. I've got this mutation that I'm trying to do in my my Redwood, my front end code, that is trying to call this create comment mutation, but it's not happening. And that's because I need to go over here into comments.js. I need to create a resolver, export const create comment, take some inputs, and then I will return something here. This is the work to be done, which will actually create it in the database. One thing I want to take a look at first, though, is when I want to do a mutation to create one, what I need. I need body and I need post ID. Now, the thing is, it would be nice if with Prisma, we could just say, hey, here's a new comment. Here's the body for it. So the text of the comment and then the post ID that we could just stick right in here to our post ID column. And that would tie these things together. But that's not possible in the current state of Prisma. And that's part of why we need either that workaround code that I was showing you from the Redwood docs, or a little bit of kind of extra stuff here when we go to create our comment in this resolver. So what we're going to do here when we go to create our comment is we're going to return db comment create. This is kind of typical Prisma stuff. And for the data that goes into here, we're going to say the body should be input.body. So we've got this key called body coming in from our input. And then we've got to do this thing called connection to our post. So for that, we say on the post field, we want to connect it with an ID that is going to come from input.postID. And that's going to give us the ability to create the comment and then insert the post ID that we want into the post ID column to actually create that comment. So this, in theory, should work now. Let's see here. If I come back and I say great post, I hit go, did not work. Let's see what we've got. Create comment on type mutation. Maybe there's something that's not been saved yet. Let's see. Looks like everything is saved. Create comment there. And the comments. Oh, it's because I forgot to put in my mutation. So if you want to save any data, typically you've got to come in and extend the mutation type here and give it what you want. In this case, I want something called create comment. The input is going to point to create comment input. And what I'm going to expect back from that is a single comment. And that'll be the comment that I have just created. So let's give this another shot here. Back over. If we submit, there we go. There's our comment that says great post. Cool. So now we've got comments in the mix, right? We've got this comment that's in our database under post ID points to a post of 1. So those are now associated. And when I am querying for my data, so if I were to like refresh this, and I'm realizing now that this is in DevTools here, probably nobody can see this. If I bump it up though, hopefully this is good now. Post is what I get back, and I've got this field of comments, which is an array or a list if you're talking in GraphQL speak, and it's got my comment. Awesome. We've got a one-to-many relationship happening now. So what else can we do? We might want a many-to-many relationship to exist somewhere in our application. And in the context of a blog, what we can maybe think about is if we had, let's say we had categories, right? So if we had a model, and we'll call it category, and we have the same kind of pattern here where the ID is an integer, and then a category, maybe we give it a name. The category name is kind of all we're interested in. The idea here is we want to start to like categorize our blog posts, right? So we've got that. what we might think to do is say like many different posts can have many different categories, and the inverse is true as well. Many different categories can be pointing to many different posts. So there's a couple different ways to create a many-to-many type of relationship here in Prisma. And one of them is to use what we call the implicit variety of many-to-many. And that is where all you really do here in your schema is you're going to say that many different categories are going to have many different posts. What that looks like is you would say you'd have a key of post, and that's going to point to the post model. Say that's going to be an array, basically like a list, right? It's going to have many of them. And then you would just do the same thing on post, but you would point to category, and you would say that I want to have category, where category is going to be pointing to the category model. There are going to be many of them. So if we do this and we don't touch anything else in our model, this is going to give us a way to work with many-to-many relationships. Now, if you're familiar with many-to-many relationships, you might be familiar with how typically you would use what we call like a pivot table. So instead of having some kind of like foreign primary key relationship directly in whatever tables you're interested in, you would have this intermediary table that would give you information about both those two tables that you're interested in, and we call this a pivot table. It's kind of like this table that sits in the middle that tells your system how things relate to one another, and that's the typical way of doing this with a many-to-many relationship. So let's try this. We'll do yarn. Let me get back down here. Yarn Redwood DB, and we want to save category. I'll call it. And I'm mentioning there's this implicit way of doing it. There's also what we call the explicit way of doing it. I'll talk about that in just a second after I show you what ends up in the database here. So we'll do db up. And if I go over to my database now and I refresh, I've got this table that was created for me called underscore category to post. And the hint here is that anything with an underscore that ends up in your database, all else being equal, if you've got an underscore, that's probably something that Prisma put there, unless you explicitly named your table something with an underscore, which I don't even think you can do. So this is Prisma stuff. And it's called category to post because Prisma is looking at your models and saying, okay, we've got a many-to-many relationship between category and post. We need a pivot table, 2 columns, A and B. That's it, really simple. The idea here is that you're going to put the ID from category here, and you're going to put the ID from post here, and that's going to be your pivot table for how these two things relate. So you can do this implicitly. This is the implicit variety, but you can also do it explicitly where you would have something like a model called category to post, something like that. Another pattern we see is category on post, this kind of thing. So you can do it explicitly like that, but if you want Prisma just to manage your many-to-many relationships, that's totally fine. You can leave it like this. Cool. So we've got that. We've got that in place. What I'll show you, I think we might be running tight on time anyway. What I'll show you is not the full kind of like CRUD UI to actually go in and categorize your posts, but I do want to, maybe I'll scaffold out. I'll do yarn Redwood generate scaffold out category. And the idea here is I want to just create one category. I want to then associate it with, like to do a many-to-many relationship with a post and just prove kind of that it works essentially. So if I go into my routes.js, I've got categories in there. I'm going to name these admin. This is kind of the state that I got to from the tutorial. If I go to admin now, I should be able to get these. Let's see if that's true. Admin. Categories new. Cool, there we go. My first category. There we go, it's in place. I love this about Redwood. By the way, Redwood authors, thank you so much. This is scaffolding out a full CRUD UI is just amazing. So please do more things like that. I think that is just awesome. So we've got that done. We've got a category. And now what we can probably do is prove out that like we can get that category back associated with a post. We've got a little bit of work to do to actually to make that happen within our models and within the SDL. But if we go into the database, where did my database go? We're in category to post. I know I've got just 2 items, right? I've got one category. It's got an ID of 1. I've got one post. It's got an ID of 1. So in category to post, I'm going to say that category 1 is related to post 1. And I'm going to save that. So I just manually stuffed this into the database, but in your application, you would have some kind of UI to do this, right? If I then go into, let's see, if I'm in source and I'm in services, I've got categories now. So I've got my resolvers for my categories. I've got in GraphQL, I've got my categories SDL. We'll go into post SDL, and there's probably a way to do this. I don't know what it is. I'm going to do singular for category, even though I'm returning more than 1. And typically what we do is say that this key is called categories, but I want this to map up to what's coming out of the database easily. So, if there's a way to pluralize or unpluralize, it's kind of on the fly. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but anyway, categories is going to point to a list of categories. Then if I am in my posts resolvers, I can, when I go to find many, I can also say category. Should be true as well. We want to include the categories. Likewise, when we find a single post, we want to say category is true. That just says include those. It'll do up the relationship stuff that it needs to, and we should be good to go. And so I don't have any UI for this, but I mean, what we can do is we can take a look in DevTools. Let's have a look in the network tab. So I got my post back. When did I get here? Comments. I'm not yet querying from my front end for categories, but I can change that up. If I go into blog posts, where's my queries here? So this is a single post category. I want ID and name. And I think I have to do this now down here as well. Yep. Oops. Oh, let me just double check that I didn't mess anything up. Over here. Okay. I have just lost my keyboard and my mouse category. All right, so now over here. Let's see what I got. GraphQL posts. I've got my category list, my first category there. Cool. So I have all of that wired up. That's kind of how you would think about relationships. Again, there's you got one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many relationships, and that's a general look at how you might start to conceptualize things. So that's about all I've got. I would point you to the relations docs again. I mean, everything's at prisma.io/docs that you might want to look into. And again, here's this doc on the kind of workaround stuff that you can do for the scaffolded stuff, the generated stuff that you get from Redwood. And I'll also point you towards my Twitter. I'm Ryan Chenkie on Twitter. This is me here. So come follow me at Ryan Chenkie on Twitter. And that's about all I've got. I'm going to stop sharing screen, and I'm just realizing that I might need to rejig my headphones here. So I don't know if somebody from Redwood wants to come back in, and I don't know. That's about all I got.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. That was really great. It's really exciting to see you work so effectively with Redwood and just be able to work through these sort of basic relation problems with your database and hook them in, get the SDL hooked up, get the service written out. This is the bread and butter of what web development ends up looking like at the sort of the API layer, where you're not focused too much on the front end yet. But then once you can pull those values back, you're just working in normal React land, use whatever CSS you want, and there you go, right? You just layer things on top of each other. It's really awesome to see you being effective with that.
Yeah, totally. It's such a pleasure to work with a system that gives you like a lot for free and gets you moving quickly. And that's what Redwood has given for sure. I was pleasantly surprised when I started to dig in. Like I'd heard the news, the good news of Redwood, but I didn't realize like how quickly you could get stuff done. And that's such a plus. Like having this stack of stuff that everybody likes, like React and like GraphQL, but just orchestrating things together to give you like an awesome experience. That's been really cool to experience as I've been prepping for this.
Are there things that you think we could make easier in those flows? The things that you ran into, especially regarding Prisma or integration of Prisma, that could make it easier?
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess if there was a better automated way to get like those relationship resolvers kind of in a state where you'd probably want them to be, that's probably the obvious one. I'm sure you've heard that a lot. I guess, it's early still, right? So there's things that are changing, I'm sure, and I think like as Prisma evolves, maybe it becomes easier as well as new features get put into place. But that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. The generators, though, are great. I mean, they give you what I would expect you would get, and yeah, it's been a joy to use it.
If we could set the ID directly, that relational ID directly, then we could generate those scaffolds, and you would just have a text entry box for an ID. And then we wouldn't have to do anything fancy, which we've requested. So you can take that back to the Prisma team and
I will nudge them on that again for sure.
This was a trick. We wanted you to experience the thing we need. So now we have an insider, right? So how easy would it be? And
I don't know the technical limitations necessarily, and maybe you know them better than I do, but I'll certainly make some noise about it in our Slack. Count on me for that.
Yeah, it would be convenient, right? Because then we could generate those scaffolded files, and they would do what Rails does. Rails has the same approach. They're just like, oh, you have a relationship to something. Like, here's a text box. Go find an ID and put it in here if you want. And that's sufficient. It's sufficient to generate the scaffolds and have them be there without them breaking, which is what happens right now. And then we have to tell you like, oh, they're broken because, and here's how you fix them. But it ends up adding a bunch of code that really most people aren't necessarily going to want. So yes, if you could fight for us.
You betcha.
Let's open this up. Rob, if you had some questions, we can go here. But if anyone else wants to either ask a question in the chat, which is fantastic, Guled is here, but feel free to join. And we've got about 13 minutes left, and let's go for some questions.
I have a question.
Go, Rob, go.
Did you think about any downsides to like in your service where you comments true?
Any downsides to that?
Yeah, we discovered a downside to that.
Okay. I mean, I suppose that like one of the issues with GraphQL traditionally is, so GraphQL solves this overfetching problem from your clients to your APIs. You ask for just the fields you want for. But unless you're doing something explicit to fix it, you are probably overfetching from your database when you are writing your GraphQL queries. So if you have a client query that says, I just want the posts, I don't want the comments, but you have a resolver that is always including those comments, then you're overfetching from the database. So that's one downside. Another is that maybe the kind of like query that you would be making from your database should not be allowed to include certain fields, maybe based on some kind of like access control rules. There's that downside as well. So maybe data ends up in a spot where it shouldn't because you're trying to restrict on access control. So it's kind of like a brute force approach to just say comments true. But I'm curious as to what you ran into.
Yeah, that's the exact one, that overfetching. So there is a fix for that Apollo provides. So when you generated the comment service, there was that second export down at the bottom that was like comment object root
Right.
So now it only goes and gets comments if you request them through the GraphQL. It calls that right. function instead, and then only gets them that way.
Yeah.
So we do generate them to fix that sort of overfetching problem.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Totally. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking about. I gave a talk on that at GraphQL Summit last year about how it's common to overfetch from your database when you're writing your GraphQL APIs, and that it's something that like has resonated with a lot of people. They're like, yeah, I've done that too. Like we're doing that too on my team, and it's like not trivial to go and fix. So if Redwood is providing tooling that just makes that super easy, it's, that's awesome. That's like solving a lot of people's pain that maybe they didn't even know they had, but it's an important one for sure.
Pagination, which we haven't really tackled in Redwood yet, but we'd like to define a set of patterns around pagination. Like there's a couple of different types that we would love to be able to support, and there could be some marriage of Redwood and Prisma in that regard to make that easy, because pagination is terrible, right? Like you're like, you have this beautiful thing, it's just an array, and then you're like, oh, right, pagination, right, okay, now I got it. Like if you want to do it the right way, like you're going to use a cursor, and you're going to have to keep track of where you are and send that back in, and you get or you use like the node, you've got the nodes and the edges, and then you're like, oh my God, how did this get so complicated?
Yeah, it really gets complicated fast.
Yeah, so we're hoping that we can help in that regard too, because anytime you just grab your list of things, you're setting yourself up for trouble, unless you know that set's going to be really small.
Yep.
But in general, if you have lists of things, they can grow large, and then you start shooting yourself in the foot if you're not paginating.
Absolutely.
So that's something that we have to look forward to.
If you look at our the example blog, I have a really simple version of pagination, right? I just pass like a page and a results per page into every GraphQL query, and then it just passes that through to Prisma with an offset and a limit.
Gotcha.
Goulet.
Oh,
hey, we'll let Goulet
Hey,
go
Goulet.
with the question. I'm going to go to Rich next, and then Anthony's up.
Oh,
in the queue
sorry.
as well,
I was sorry.
so. I tricked you. I waited until you weren't ready. Go ahead.
Exactly. I was just so I have a question to Ryan. It comes from the Nest.js community as well, and the Angular. And I've been doing a little bit Nest.js, and when I do RedwoodJS, I kind of, there's certain things that I miss from the Nest.js, like these sort of a lot of these sort of, if anyone here experienced Nest.js, it's really heavily relies on the TypeScript. I mean, it's sort of really strongly typed framework, and I don't know. It's also, I feel like it scales really well. So I don't know. How would you compare RedwoodJS, which is like end to end, how would you compare it to Nest.js? I don't know if I sort of.
I mean, there's definitely a couple of things to say there. I mean, I guess primarily the first thing is that Nest is a server framework, right? It allows you to create back-end applications, and it is very heavily inspired by Angular. So if you're writing an Angular front end and you need a back end with it, they go very well together because you're seeing the same patterns in both places. But that's the first thing, is that Nest is for the back ends, whereas Redwood gives you a full stack experience. So if you're writing something for the full stack and if you like the React ecosystem, it makes a lot of sense to use something like Redwood. And regarding TypeScript, so this is something that I'm really looking forward to experiencing with Redwood. I maybe the Redwood team could even speak to this as to like, what can we expect? That's something I'm curious about, is what can we expect TypeScript wise? Are there any goodies you can share that are like niceties that maybe we wouldn't anticipate in just kind of vanilla TypeScript?
Oh, here, Peter's not a moderator. Here he comes.
I'm over here. Sorry, I was lying very unflatteringly in my chair. So, Ryan, one of the things that I'm looking into is actually taking the SDL to the resolvers and from there into your client, so that you have like this full end-to-end TypeScript experience. And I think that's going to really make everything feel much more integrated. So those are one of the things that we have a checkbox for it in our TypeScript roadmap. But I've looked at it over the weekend, actually, last weekend, and it seems possible. It's just a little bit of work on our side. So
Cool.
That might be a surprise addition.
Also have to think about developer happiness. I mean, the thing is about Redwood that I noticed is that they want to keep it as simple as possible for people to sort of pick, to join and to sort of use the framework and not make it very robust. I mean, like Angular is, people make jokes about it that it's very hard software a framework to use, like, and similar to Nest.js, where the way I understand with Redwood and Tom described, like I remember speaking about type graphical, and maybe like they could use it in Redwood, but Tom like explicitly stated that he wants to keep it as simple as possible, and like the current state is about that. So I don't know. I as long as it doesn't turn RedwoodJS into some kind of monster.
Rob, that's the Rob test. Rob doesn't allow
that's what
it
Rob's
to become a
here.
monster.
That's what Rob's here for. Rob keeps us honest.
If it doesn't look like Rails,
he tells us when something gets too complicated. Yeah, I think we want to use TypeScript for the things that TypeScript is really good at, and those things are giving you real-time developer time checks as you're building things, and being able to autocomplete is huge, right? Like you see it in the Prisma file. It's like, who wants to type out auto increment, right? Like, or even remember how it's spelled. Or there's various things in Redwood that the autocomplete is really, really good for. And one thing, Ryan, that Peter added recently was in your routes file, you are generally, when you're using route parameters, you're creating typed information in your route, and we can now pick up on that. And you can use that when you're using a named route function in your front end. So if you import routes and you say routes dot, it'll autocomplete what your possible routes are. And then if you type one of those, it'll tell you now what parameters you are expected to give to that route. So these are things where we're actually parsing the string to figure out what the typed information in the route is. So these are the places where you can use TypeScript to great effect, where you maybe wouldn't normally expect it, but then you start using it and you're like, oh yeah, like totally, you could do that, and hey, here the framework is doing it for you. So we want to do that everywhere that makes sense to do. And indeed, if you can't do it at the TypeScript level, which you can't do everything, because there are certain things that are relevant to the structure of Redwood, like when you have an SDL, when you have a query in an SDL file, Redwood expects that you have that implemented in a services file. And if you don't, that's not really something that TypeScript can do for you. But we do have a team. There's a company called Decoupled that is working on what they're calling the Jamstack IDE. It's essentially a plugin to VS Code that does have that intelligence and can tell you in your SDL file when you don't have the service implementation for a specific SDL query or mutation. So we're trying to take it even to the next level of the ethos of TypeScript and this sort of real-time type checking or even structure checking. We want to go even further with those types of IDE improvements.
Excellent. Yeah. Somebody tweeted the other day something to the effect, I forget the exact context of the tweet, but it's like, how much coding can I get done by just like having the autocomplete box come up and me just hitting enter and then period and then enter, that kind of thing. And so the more of that you can do, I think the happier developers will be.
That's what we're going for. So TypeScript, we're getting there, and it should be pretty awesome. And I think TypeScript, people that are used to writing in TypeScript are going to be really happy very soon.
Very cool.
Writing, but there's a lot of benefit with using TypeScript, but at the same time, it comes with a cost too. Like if you're going to share types from all the way from the server to the forms, like the client-side forms, it's a lot of stuff that has to happen between. You have to sort of define. I don't know. There's a lot of work as well. But
I'm bringing up Anthony here. I want to get through just because we're at the hour. We'll take a break here in between things. So we'll bring up Anthony. We had a couple other people asking questions in the chat, so I might go over there. But let me get to Rich. Yeah, hi Anthony. Let me get to Rich first. But Rich was asking, how difficult is it to implement cascading deletes? For example, delete a post and the associated comments get blown away.
Right.
Yeah, it feels, well, I kind of know where that's goes. Yeah, somebody jump in there, because I'm not sure that's a Prisma question, or is it, Ryan?
Well, as far as I know, there's not like stuff you would do in Prisma for cascading deletes. We have an article on it. So if you're, I'll link to the main article spot, doc spot here. It's coming in the chat right now. There we go. So cascading deletes, the advice that's given in these docs here is basically at like the database level. So it's going to give you kind of an explanation of cascading deletes and what you might do to furnish them with your with your database. But I think there's work to do beyond just like the Prisma level if you want to enable cascading deletes. Like you wouldn't really set it up in your model.
Right. So yeah, the logic for that would need to live in the Redwood services.
Yeah, and like if you're wanting to put stuff into your like set some triggers or do stuff at the database level, like this guide should be able to this guide here that I linked should be able to get you on your way.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Anthony, did you have something? Well,
sure,
relatively quick. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's fairly simple. First off, awesome demo, Ryan. I thought that was really awesome.
Thank you.
I definitely learned a lot. I've seen your stuff floating around the Twitterverse a lot. So when I heard you were coming to the meeting, I was like, sweet, I know that dude. I am wondering if someone was interested in kind of getting some new database drivers going, what would be the best way to go about doing that? Because I'm very interested in lots of databases that aren't necessarily supported by Prisma, but to really get the Redwood experience, you want what Prisma offers.
Right.
So I think getting Prisma drivers to more non-relational databases would be key there.
Yeah, it's a great question. And super common request is like, when is support for Mongo coming? When is support for like Dynamo?
That's why I'm not asking when it's coming. I'm asking how I can help make it come.
How can help you? Yeah, and so the truth is I don't know exactly, but I'm loving that you're keen on helping. So I'm going to figure out what the best way is, and I'll definitely follow up with you after. For those who aren't aware, Prisma supports basically 3 databases right now. It's Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite. 2 of those are ones that you would probably use in production, right? Postgres and MySQL. Non-relational database.
Aurora too, I've heard.
What's that?
Don't you guys support Aurora as well?
I guess I'm not too sure. I mean, Aurora, they give you like a variety of like a Postgres or MySQL database, right? Okay. So it's kind of like, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I saw you guys did.
You're probably right.
Compatible. They should work. They're compatible.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, and but non-relational, so document databases, it's a whole different beast. And we've been talking internally about like what does this look like, and it's on the roadmap because it's certainly people want it, but it's such a complex thing to give the same experience for a non-relational database that it's a lot of work. So I want to find out for you how you can help support it, because you're keen on that, and I appreciate that. So let me send me a DM on Twitter, and we can follow up in that way.
Cool. Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you. And then just last question, when is Prisma going to finally admit that they built an ORM?
That's a good question too. Yeah, so for context there, if you've been following like the Prisma like marketing messaging, it's like, we're not an ORM, we're a database toolkit. There's all these like nuanced reasons why we're not an ORM. We're starting to realize more and more that like people refer to us as an ORM, and if that's the way they refer to us, then maybe that's okay. So maybe that.
Yeah, Nick Berg has been saying it sits in between a query layer and the ORM.
Yeah.
So you have to come up with a whole new term if you want to take that space. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's hard to communicate these things.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're figuring
very nuanced thing.
Yeah, and we're figuring out like the right terminology as we go. But ORM may be making a comeback. We'll see.
All right, I'm gonna get. We've got one more question, and we'll call it an hour.
Cool.
Gulid and Anthony, I ran out of space here, so thank you guys. Oh, there we go. And Nemo.
Hi, hello.
Coming up, and we'll do this our last question for this part.
Yeah, so I had 2 questions actually, but I'll start with the one that kind of is related to Anthony's question, and on the topic of database connections. And so this is a bit of a moonshot, but have you guys thought about making a database connection to a graph database as opposed to relational or document-based databases? Since that could really, like, it's really quite a paradigm shift. I don't know if it would work with Prisma, but it could really help with things like relations, especially, and removing the need for joins and things like that.
Yeah. In terms of like the desire for database support, Graph is probably towards the low end. And I just searched because I was curious, like what the story is, if anybody's been requesting like Neo4j support, for example. And there's an old issue from 2018. There doesn't look like there's a ton of stuff happening there. I think Graph database is probably less of a request, at least from what I've experienced. The next like paradigm I think that we're going into is definitely document before Graph, if at all, to Graph.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say don't hold up development if you're waiting for that.
No, I was kind of expecting that because, to be honest, I think Graph databases, like as a database engine, is already kind of still in development and not quite being used in production all over the place. So I think that'll be interesting for the future, though.
Yeah, we have an early example. This was actually probably in April. So you can connect to any database you want with Redwood's API. There's a Neo4j example in the forums, and thank you, Anthony. That's up. So check out that link. And there's also, Anthony recently did a Redwood integration example with FaunaDB, which is a serverless database. So conceptually, you can plug Redwood's API into all of the things, including multiple of the same kind of things. So there's some exciting work to be done there. We would love to see integration examples that people want to try out and put in the forum. The community is looking for that. And also it could provide a good little feedback loop to Prisma to say, look what we're doing without you. Don't get left behind. So Brian, so we'll kind of close this off about 6 minutes past. Ryan, that was, really helpful. Thank you.
Awesome.
We've already got people asking for the recording. We will be posting the recording. There's a YouTube channel, but all this gets documented in our forums. We'll put that on Twitter. So again, follow us on Twitter. Join the forums if you want to get updates there. And any last thing? So let's do this. Let's kind of close this. We'll bring this to a close. But if people want to linger and have open discussion, conversation, you want to ask Rob why his camera looks just so amazing on screen. Now's the time to do that. So please linger around. But from everyone up here, any other last things? Nemo, even from you, any last things before we kind of close off this bit?
I had like a separate question. I don't know if we should get into that right now. But anyway, thanks for those links. I'll definitely check those out. And I'll be interested in working with those in the future. Yeah,
Nemo, hang on. Let's come to your question here in a bit. But so we'll wrap this up. But stay online.
Cool. Can we petition Ryan? Can we petition Ryan to fight for cascading deletes in Prisma? You guys have cascading inserts.
I can certainly find out what the story is a bit more and also make some noise about it. Let me take a note on that because I've been curious about finding out what the actual story is anyway. So
Rails has a couple interesting options that you can say, like in a has many, my dependents should be just nullified, like just null out post ID, but leave them in the database, or destroy them for me. So it destroys those first and then destroys the parent, which would be very handy.
I'll find out more, and I'll come back to another meetup and let folks know.
All those in favor of nominating Ryan is our RedwoodJS ambassador.
There you go.
Yep, it's true. I don't know how we need to document that on the website, but Ryan, it's official. Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Let us know where to send the bribes to.
Okay,
I will. My office address.
All right. Well, we'll shift it. If people need to peel out, please do. We're going to do this again in a couple weeks, so be looking for some information there. And thank you all again for joining. It's really fun to be building this with you. So you can find us on the forums and the GitHub issues. Reach out on Twitter if you'd like to. Any other follow-up stuff, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you again. So and anyone else who wants to jump up on the stage, please please feel free. I'll click the little accept button. Nemo, what was your next? And Ryan, can you stick around a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, Nemo, go ahead if you had something else.
Yeah. Cool. So I had a little bit more practical question on the context of the app from your talk, right?
Mhm.
So for the comment model, is it required that it has such a post and a post ID field, even if you don't expect that you ever want to get the post like given a comment?
If you never want to get the post given a comment. So you need a field to be able to relate to a different table. So you do need that field to give you that kind of foreign key. So it's a necessity. Like if you were to go into, I guess I could share screen again, probably, right? This might be, hopefully this works. Let's see. Yeah, so if I go into my schema and I'm here at comments, and let's say I wanted to, let's do this. We'll take that off, and I'm here on posts, and I want to say that I've got a comment as a relationship. I want to relate to my comment table. I have many comments. So I save that, right? And that automatically puts this in. And if I take off that post ID, I'm going to get this red squiggly here. And that's because this bit of the model right here, this is like the Prisma side of the model. This doesn't exist in the database. This is just like a way for Prisma's client to reason about what the relationship is. Whereas you need something in your database to tie these two tables together, and that's got to be post ID. It doesn't have to be named post ID. You could call this my awesome post ID, and then you could put this right there, and it would do the same thing. But you do need something in your database to tie them together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the constraint comes mainly from the database itself, where you just need to have that column.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You bet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. I gotta stop sharing here.
And
anyone else?
the many. So you don't have to do that on the many to many because it's just always assuming that each side is going to have an ID column.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to use if there was a different ID, you named your ID column something different for some reason, that's when you'd have to manually create it. And then in there you can specify what the specific IDs of the two sides.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you would reference a different field.
You can reference a different field, yeah. And one spot where this comes in is like if you're coming with an existing database and you run Prisma's introspection feature to derive a model from your existing database, quite often there's a need to modify your Prisma model, but also like map up to certain fields in your database that you don't want to change. And in that, to do that, you can use these special decorators that we've got, like @map, which like allows you to go from one field to a different field, and so that with like relations, many relations, that you'll see tie-ins there quite often. Yeah, no problem.
I got a question.
Sure.
I'm kind of curious. So how long have you been with Prisma?
This is month 3. Yeah, I started in July.
Okay, cool. So I'm sure you know the history in terms of how it went from GraphQL to Prisma 2, which is now just Prisma.
Yeah.
How has like the pivot away from GraphQL been?
How's it been? Well, there's been a lot of people that have not been stoked on it. I know that, but that's going to come with anything. Yeah, and in terms of like what it's because like the company historically, right, is known as a GraphQL company, and a lot of people still associate Prisma very heavily with GraphQL, and that's for good reason. That's the history. So it's been interesting, like, and I've been part of this work to like essentially rebrand or like retell the story of like what Prisma does, and it's interesting to come up against. So like what'll happen is you'll explain like what Prisma does now, where it came from, etc. And even after doing that a few times, people still tend to associate it with GraphQL, and it dies very hard.
It's hard not to, because GraphQL is just everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it's everything now.
Yeah. And what doesn't help, I suppose, too, is that like even though we're not a GraphQL first company anymore, we still have a lot to do with the GraphQL community. We have these libraries and things we maintain, like Nexus. Is this code first way of
Nexus
GraphQL?
confuses the crap out of me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're working on that. We're hoping to have the confusion be reduced. So that's
Yeah, no, and I know it's like I'm working on it. It's partly I just don't know the things that Nexus is about. It's about type safety and all that kind of stuff, and I'm not a CS guy.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so hopefully some content that is coming in the next few months will help with that. But yeah, to answer your question, like we have tie-ins to the GraphQL community. We are historically a GraphQL company, and now we're trying to tell people that we don't have anything to do with GraphQL, which is this weird, interesting challenge. But we're working on it.
Cool, awesome, thank you.
No problem.
We were going down the road of supporting Nexus there for a while.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that.
And then I freaked out.
Uh-oh.
Tom,
tell me about Nexus. What is Nexus? How would you explain it?
I'll take a stab. So Nexus is, so right now in your GraphQL SDL manually, you write SDL. The problem though is when you start having a huge amount of SDL, you start wishing that you had some more flexible ways to create it. And so you're like, what if I had a programming language that could generate SDL for me? Or I had a library that was used to specify what the SDL would look like in code. And so Nexus is essentially a way to use code to generate the SDL. And so you can, if you have a thing that you want to do over and over again, you can have that be sort of encapsulated in a bit of code that generates it instead of you having to manually write out or copy paste the same thing over and over. And so this.
Okay, so we went from code first to schema first, is what
correct,
you're saying, right?
Correct. Yes.
But now we're going back to code first.
I'm not.
Ryan, Ryan, are you familiar with the type GraphQL? Because I've seen that one gain some popularity, particularly in the Node.js in the enterprise community, and that is it is very similar to Nexus, right?
Yeah, it does some of the same things that you would expect to find in Nexus. I mean, the biggest difference is that it looks and feels, the ergonomics of it are quite a bit different when you're writing type GraphQL, because you're using decorators and you're using classes to come up with your schema and the eventually generated SDL that you get from it and the types that you get from it. Whereas with Nexus, you're kind of just using functions. You're importing some functions and you are providing some configuration to them. That's kind of what you do in Nexus. So you end up with a similar end result, but it definitely feels a bit different to use one over the other. That's what I found.
It's the popularity on the type side, yeah.
I think, well, it's been around for longer. I don't know exactly when it started, and I think I'm right in saying that it's been around for longer. Nexus schema, I mean, this Nexus and the framework that we've got and the Nexus schema library have been around for a few years, but I think like type GraphQL, maybe there's similar starting points. I don't quite know, but I feel like type GraphQL really took off in popularity at an earlier point, and then like Nexus is getting more popular, but they've just got a head start, I suppose. Is what it comes down to. That's the only reason that I know of. Maybe there are others, but that's what I've seen.
You asked, or are we going back to that? The reason that we took that out was because it felt like an abstraction that was another layer that you had to learn on top of all these other things that we were asking you to learn. And it was really obfuscational when it came to the SDL. Like once you learn GraphQL, you're like, oh, okay, GraphQL, I get it. Here's the SDL. Here's how that functions. And then we're like, yeah, but to prepare you for like super complicated SDL, here, go learn this other library that's now going to generate that. And also the ergonomics of Nexus. I mean, I hope maybe it's improved in a while. The ergonomics of it were to me, not very good. Like it was just the way that even like you had to specify lists. Like it just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And for Rob coming into it, he was like, this is ridiculous. Like this is just it's too much to ask people to have to deal with. And there is something really beautiful about being able to just point someone at a directory of SDL and be like, this is the API. You can read it. If you want to change it, you just change the SDL, like you know SDL, because if you work with GraphQL, you have to know SDL. And to me, that level of readability ends up being really important, more important to me than the things that you get out of generating it, at least at this point. And what I've said all along is, if we need the types of things that Nexus would provide, I would prefer to find a way that looked more like SDL or some kind of a processing layer on top of SDL that would allow you to do that. Akin to sort of, there are certain things that you can put in SDL, decorators of sorts, that can do that, like using those and extending them or having some custom layer on top. I would prefer that to something like Nexus, because I want to work with the SDL. I want to be like in the SDL.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of, and it's an interesting sort of like, it's an interesting debate, I think, around like code first versus SDL first, because there are trade-offs either way. But what I often tell people, especially if they're new to GraphQL, and I think you kind of touched on this, Tom, is like if you're newer to GraphQL, you're probably better off to spend a lot of time with SDL at the beginning, because you're going to see it at some point anyway. If you're using a code first approach, you're going to have a generated SDL file, and you want to understand what's happening. That's like the canonical GraphQL server way of it's the canonical way of building a GraphQL server.
I learned that through Redwood. I learned how SDLs work by learning Redwood.
Gotcha. Yep. And I think it's important to know that before going code first. Once you're there, once you've got some experience, I think there's a lot of you can often move quicker if you're using a code first approach. Depends what you're doing, but oftentimes you can move a bit quicker. But trade-offs all around, I think.
This is the thing too. I mean, at some point, if as people start getting more experience with Redwood and there's larger applications and people end up with a lot of GraphQL, there's really nothing that would prevent you from using something like Nexus to generate your GraphQL. We could make that an easier. But at the end of the day, what we want is SDL. That's what gets ingested by Apollo right now. So there's really nothing that would prevent someone from adding that as an additional layer. So that's something that we can look at in the future too. If something comes out where there's like a best practice around, it's like, oh yeah, of course. Like when you end up with a more mature application and you need something to help you create your SDL, then everyone's using type GraphQL or something, then we can figure out a way to integrate that and make it an option for people once they go further.
Yep. That sounds really cool.
We had, I think David Tierson is still here, but he had asked Ryan if you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you were at Auth0 at one time previously. And yeah, there he is. David, I don't know if you want to join or not, but I'll ask the question that I believe I recall you asking. Ryan, would you be interested in a future discussion on API security? So Prisma, especially with authentication. We have the Redwood Auth package. A lot of great work also on RBAC now that David T has done. So might be a little bit more of a deep dive into Redwood, the Redwood verse for you. But there's been some questions on what does it look like to do security on the back end well? What are the concerns there with Prisma, with the API in general, et cetera? So
I'd be excited to do something like that. Maybe
broad topic.
Yeah. Shameless plug time. I'll put it in the chat. I've got this course on securing your React applications if you are looking to do just such a thing. And so it doesn't touch on Redwood, but maybe I should update it to touch on Redwood. In any case, I would be happy to talk about that. It's something that I'm very always curious about, and I really like the topic of. So yeah, man, I'd be stoked to talk about security. Learned a lot of cool stuff when I worked at Auth0 about application security, and yeah, happy to bring it to the table here.
Well, if you haven't tried out the Redwood Auth package that Peter wrote, it's very quick and near seamless to get set up. And Auth0 is one of the built-in providers. So there's been a lot of nice work there, and a lot of examples that are showing up on the forums for how to do more with Auth0 as well.
Yep, so that's great.
Really nice.
I think that's. I haven't gotten to the point to touch the auth stuff yet with Redwood, but that's next on my list. And from what I've seen, though, it looks like it's just so simple, which is amazing. Very cool.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing educational materials in the future, or anyone really, we're hoping that Redwood can be a way for people to really get into what they're trying to teach more quickly. Like I would love to do a series of videos sometime. I've been thinking about it in my head around teaching GraphQL, because with Redwood, you can get all of the boilerplate is done for you. All of the basic concepts are really easy to get to. You just start, instead of having to be like, oh, here's how you set up something to be able to use GraphQL. It's just like create a new Redwood app and you're ready to start building something that's real with GraphQL. And introducing those concepts, I think, could be really nice in that context. Same around auth, same around different CSS types of things. I think it could be a really good platform for people doing educational materials off of.
That's that's awesome. I'm a big fan of the educational material, as you can probably tell. And I just saw in the chat, been meaning to watch those videos the past 4 or 5 weeks. Here is a little treat for Redwood people. Extra discount coupon Redwood.
Nice.
Extra 30% off. So if you want something,
that's good. How long do you want me to promote that, Brian? I mean, I love to share links with people, but should we cut that? Should we cut that out of the video, or maybe you should just time that out?
That's fine. If they find it, they can have it. I appreciate it. That's cool. If you want to leave it in, or if you want to take it out for your own sake, feel free.
Thank you.
Right. If we have time,
we'll take care of that.
For another question, I would like to know how Prisma foresees the middleware being used, or what are some interesting ways that people are actually using the middleware right now?
Yeah, I don't know of real life use cases, but some things that you can conceptually think about would be things like instrumentation. You can think about like starting to get some metrics on your queries, that sort of thing. What else could you do? One thing that I've been wondering about, I wonder if it's a place for middlewares or not. I don't know, but you often end up building applications where you've got tables that have something like a user ID, maybe. So maybe a user owns a record, and then maybe like an organization that user belongs to also owns that record. And you need some way of like doing access control based on that. You need to make sure that all of your queries include the user ID or include the organization ID to make sure you get the right data back. So maybe in a middleware, I don't know if this is true, but maybe that's a good spot for a middleware where you say a query is going to go through that middleware, and that middleware is going to do some kind of transformation to make sure that those parameters are always included. That's something I could foresee it doing, but I don't really know enough about how they work to make sure that that's like a viable option. But I'd be curious if that's the case.
Yeah, I had like this poor man's RBAC or poor man's authentication per row, where I was just adding user ID to every single table. I only have like 6, and I thought maybe I could use the middleware just to say, hey, only give me the rows that are used for this user.
Right.
I'll play around with that. It seems like a nice idea.
Yeah, totally. I got to play around with it more too.
Also, we were wondering, how do we pronounce your surname?
Say that again. Sorry.
How do we pronounce your last name?
Chenkie. So it's a Polish last name, which it probably doesn't look like it, but it's the Americanized or the Canadianized version of it. My great grandparents came over from Poland in the 1920s. They changed it to that because it didn't look like it. So this is the way it's spelled in Poland. I just put it in the chat. But that CI sound definitely doesn't translate to English. So they changed it for them. And that's where it comes from. Yeah.
I have a question. This is like a Prisma thing. So like, how do you specify the length of a text? Like if you want to have a short text or a long text?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's not like support for you to be able to say, I want varchar or whatever, like number of digits. I don't think that's supported. I could be wrong, but yeah, I don't think there's a way to do that. You kind of have to do that at the database level if you want it. Have you guys, as the Redwood team, been looking at that?
Rob's dealt with this before.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. It leads to some amazing data loss. How come you guys don't support text?
Data loss? No.
Text is like the most important database field.
Yeah, the default is what,
no one uses
256 characters or something. It's an unfortunate default.
Okay, tell me more.
Tell them all.
And we might get booted in like a minute or seconds. I don't know. We'll keep going there until this is done. But
Well, I
FYI. Go ahead,
didn't
Tom.
even, I just, for some reason, I just figured, oh, if it's a string, it's going to be a string, which would be probably text in the database. So I just did that, and MySQL doesn't warn you about that, so it'll just cut it off at 256 characters and stick it in the database. So I had an app where people were leaving like these big long comments, like notes to themselves, and they just end, and there's no indication that that's going to happen. And then come to find out, Prisma doesn't support setting text, and that was like unbelievable to me.
Do you know if there's an open issue about it? Have you seen one on the Prisma?
I don't know offhand. I'm sure there must be somebody. I'm sure other people have run into.
Yeah, I think Guled put it in, didn't you? 44, 47.
Yeah, exactly. I posted in the comment in the event log.
Yeah, it's been open for a long time.
Yeah, there's also cases, of course, where you want it shorter. You want 128 or 32, but there's no way to set that.
Yeah, and you just went into the database and changed it directly, right?
Yeah, I think their recommendation was like actually edit the migration file or something to set it to text, or write an additional migration that's just the raw SQL to do it.
Yeah,
which doesn't seem ideal. Yeah,
it's probably something that will roll around at some point for a feature, but not there yet. So I think a lot of these ergonomic things, you will find that they'll be improved in the future. And in this unfortunate case of data loss, I think that will be improved upon too. So yeah, expect some better ergonomics there, I think, as we go forward.
I was hoping, because there's @ID, @default, it'd be like an @type, and you can just specify the type. That
yeah, I think that's probably what we'll see eventually. That's something along those lines, I would expect.
Before you get cut off, has anybody noticed my shirt? This is my nihilist Arby's shirt. Can you read? For people that don't know, Arby's is a restaurant. Arby's is like a fast food chain in the US. And there's a Twitter account called Nihilist Arby's, where the guy acts like he's a Twitter brand guy for Arby's, but he just makes like all nihilist comments about how nothing matters. Enjoy Arby's.
What's the handle for that?
I think it's just Nihilist Arby's, like however you spell nihilist.
Look it up. That's funny.
There's an H in there. Well, this has been great. Thank you all. We're an hour and a half. We did good. The recording still going. It didn't cut off, but yeah, I think this was really fun. Ryan, thank you again.
We got to find to get more people able to join the real-time video. Do we just pay?
Yeah,
do we just pay them more? Is that how it works?
No, I think it's a max on the video streaming. I'll check.
Really?
It's at 9 now, but yeah,
because it says channels they can 7. Why is it only 7?
It's 7.
If you refresh, you would see that. Don't do it because it'll kick you off the video. If you refreshed, you would see the 9 because I boosted that. I'm not sure it was at 7 before, but anyway, it's 10 max, but the screen share counts as 1.
Oh, interesting. You got to reserve 1 for screen share.
You do. They might have. I'll play around with it. They made a bunch of feature improvements in the last couple of weeks that I hadn't looked at yet. So.
Maybe you can do like a
but
60 seconds max thing. You're like, you're on 60 seconds. You just put them in, put them out.
Well, I could kick anybody off. This little red button is just like, God.
We have that. It's called David.
Yeah, but I'm so nice. All right, I think we're there. We did it. We'll see everybody in a couple of weeks, and we'll catch you in the forums or the Discord or GitHub. We'll see you somewhere else in between. Ryan, thank you.
You bet.
That was really helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Our new ambassador.
All right.
I'll send you.
Take care.
Did you get your stickers? Have you gotten your stickers yet?
Mine.
We'll send you our new ambassador stickers.
I put a request into the page, so
you'll get them soon.
Awesome.
All
Thanks, guys.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Have a good day and a good weekend.
See ya.
Stay safe out there.